All right, and we're live. Today we're coming at you with Tactical Podcast number 25. Sean Stark of Guerrilla Global. Sean runs the Instagram handle, Guerrilla Guru. He is the Guerrilla Guru, and I am very excited to speak with him today. So, Sean, you have so many years of martial arts experience, way more than I do, way more than most of my guests actually have. Sean, you started out in Taekwondo, moved into Kung Fu, Tai Chi. You were doing Wing Chun, JKD, escrima, Kali, Pancak, Salat, Arnis, all of these crazy, like, actual self-defense, chop them up, kill them up type of things, man. And I'm so glad to have you on. Now, I was also seeing that in your specialty school that you run, dude, you specialize in counter-trafficking and self-protection for women, children, the vulnerable types. First of all, before I start asking you a little bit more about that, welcome on the podcast, bro.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thrilled to have you on. So, I want to jump right into this, man. You are specializing in counter-trafficking type stuff for the vulnerable. What got you interested in this subject?
Well, it's interesting. I used to ride for a motorcycle organization called BACA, Bikers Against Child Abuse. And when I was riding with them, you see a lot of things. There's a lot of disturbing things that go on. And so it kind of started to clue in for me. You start to see like how the legal system doesn't really stand up for kids. And it's kind of like we treat our dogs better than we treat our kids a lot of times. Pets are kind of, there's more stiff penalties for animal abuse than there are for child abuse. So not in every case, but in a lot of cases. And it can be really difficult for those to get justice. And that kind of snowballed and clued me into how it works in trafficking and things like that. Because a lot of times, like, a prostitute will get arrested, and the pimp will be the one who bails her out, and then she'll go right back into the same situation when she could have been getting help, right? So, and it's not always, prostitution is not always non-voluntary, but a lot of times it is. Actually, statistically, even in countries where it's legal, actually statistically, there's more trafficking that goes on in those countries. So all of that kind of tied together, and about 2.5 years ago or something, I had an opportunity through a friend. I got introduced to Ben Meyer, who helped me kind of form this. And he was living in Quito, Ecuador, asked me to go down there and work on a program with him to help rescued kids. And so, during that process, I got to know, a lot more about trafficking specifically, and kind of got clued in that, like, by the time you're working with a rescue victim, your resources are screwed, basically. So you really best thing to do is work with them before they get drawn in. And so that's all educational, pretty much. So
now, with these trafficking victims here, typically, what's the way that they get taken? Is it, like, I'm assuming by force? Is it by drugging? How does that usually go down?
Well, it's actually way more subtle than that. Most of the time, it's it's usually a coercive, manipulative relationship. The girl or even the boy often are not forced into it. They are manipulated into situations where they make the choice to do it, seemingly, but then it's always about, like, for example, hey, I like you, you're cool, I'd like to get to know you, whatever, right? Wine and dine, make the girl really dig you, and then over the course of time, be like, you kind of owe me, I helped you out, I did some things for you, I paid for your way, I was paying for your dinner, I was doing this, I was doing that, you owe me, maybe you could just do this one thing for me to help me out, and then it kind of goes like that. And during that process, the girl, even women, often doesn't even realize they're being trafficked because they just think they're doing a favor for somebody that loves them, even though they're clearly like making money. They're not getting the money. The dude's getting the money. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of that kind of stuff. There's some really subtle stuff, actually snatch and grab kind of situations. Pretty low. It's only like 5 or 6%. The rest are almost always, it's like 50% is family that starts it.
Wow.
And so it's really a screwball thing. And most of it, it's like, there are times when drugs are involved. There are times when they get a person hooked on drugs and then they become reliant on the drugs, and there's just lots of different ways, but usually it's a debt process of some kind. And whether that's emotional or financial or drug or whatever, it's almost always that kind of a situation.
We see the movies like Taken, and we kind of think of it more like that, where it's, snatch and grab, as you were saying, but we rarely think of it as, that manipulative, coercive type of thing. But, we hear you saying now that is kind of how it typically does go down.
Yeah. There could be threats to family and stuff like that, but usually that's kind of post, once a girl starts to go, hey, this isn't right. Like, I don't know what's going on, but that doesn't seem right. And they'll be like, well, I don't want to hurt your family, or I don't want to tell your family what you did for me. And then it snowballs into a more controlled situation.
Now, when it's coming to this manipulative type of thing, what are some good ways that we can A, educate people about that, and B, educate them, how to stay away from that type of thing? How is the process done with that?
Yeah, it's educational, really. It's like a lot of what I do is I work through, situational awareness, environmental awareness, all this sort of standard stuff from a self-defense perspective. But then I also add in this component of boundary setting, and to help people kind of recognize, that they're in a situation that's manipulative. Gotta be honest, the bitch of the thing is that you literally have no recourse when it's Uncle Joe, right? Because it's like Uncle Joe already has authority in your life because he's Uncle Joe, or your dad or your mom or whatever. And so you give them extra grace, and that all snowballs, right? So it's really hard, but that education process is the first step, and getting people to self-value. That's one of the things that I really like about this kind of training, martial arts training in general, but self-protection, all that stuff, is to say, like, no, you have value, you have worth. And this usually helps to stimulate that process when they know they can fight back because they are worth fighting back for. Do I think that a 5-year-old is going to like elbow strike Grandpa Joe in the throat? Probably not, right? But we can start with her self-value and getting her to recognize that she, has worth. And then once she has worth, it's a lot easier for her to say no, or to learn how to use her voice and to stand up that way. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring this up because, we typically think of self-defense and martial arts as, chop them up, shoot them up, that type of thing. Right. Take the knife away and whatever, James Bond it. But we don't think about how much of martial arts is actually mental warfare. It's manipulation, counter manipulation, this type of thing that really is the useful type of stuff for most people out there, especially, the women, the children, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's great what you're doing, educating people, especially, like I keep saying, I keep using the word more vulnerable, but, people out there who, like you say, the 5-year-old's not going to chop Grandpa in the throat or whatever, but she absolutely can know how to, set boundaries, know how to use her words. How long has it taken you to kind of develop the program to where it is today, where it's an effective kind of piece of material that you can give someone and actually have it work?
Yeah, well, I mean, if I'm honest, it's been being developed for 30 years, of martial arts training. I was a military police officer, which helped. And so I spent a good deal of time there, and all of that coming together kind of is to me is there's no single event that's like, oh, okay, this is where I started that and that happened. It's kind of been a journey. And even now, every year as I do this and I have more people coming to my events and trainings and stuff, and you start to hear their personal stories, you learn more. And so you can put more back in and kind of say like, oh, yeah, I understood it this way, but you're telling me that's kind of true, but not really true. So, you constantly kind of evolve as you meet the need. And I don't see it ending because there's such a complexity even to regular self-defense for guys.
Yeah.
It's not like do X, Y, and Z and you're good. It's just not, it's dynamic, right? Like a guy who is dealing with a predator of any kind, if it's a gang member or whatever, those guys are essentially professional predators. And you're just a dude, like, yeah. So the process is the same, whether it's for trafficking or for abusive relationships or for guys just wanting to get their families home or whatever. The outcomes are different, but the processes are usually very similar.
Yeah, it's kind of a accumulation of a life's work, honestly. Martial artist, a war artist, someone who, you never stop developing your art, I think. Now, when you first got into martial arts, Taekwondo, how old were you?
I was like 16.
Okay. And how far did you get with Taekwondo before you started going elsewhere?
I did not stay in it very long because I joined the Army when I was 17. So I was really it was more of I'd like to do this. This is an exploration. Had no idea it was available. Did it, yeah. That kind of thing. So.
And you joined the Army at 17. You became a military police officer.
Yeah.
What kind of, if any, hand-to-hand combatives did you get in the Army?
They're pretty basic. You get pugil stick, and even as a military police officer, most of what we did was like handcuffing training, and you don't really get combatives training. I know there's a lot of I think there's a lot of BS out there about like, I'm a Navy SEAL, so I can like teach you how to fight. It's like, dude, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. Like if you took BJJ or something, but it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that you're a SEAL. It means you just fucking took jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean? Like cut the crap. Like, and I'm not saying they're not bad dudes, right? But they're bad dudes with equipment.
Yeah.
And that equipment doesn't exist for everyday ordinary people. I'm not running around with freaking night goggles on. Like, I'm not swimming underwater and putting demos on a boat. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't matter. It's almost irrelevant. Mindset is huge. That they have, like, the mindset's right. They know how to deal with stress and to keep the adrenaline dumps at bay and all that kind of stuff. Like that part, yes, but physically, I don't know.
Now you bring up mindset, Sean. How important is mindset in the martial arts, in self-defense?
I think it's probably, to pull some random statistic out of my butt, I'd say it's 75, 80%. I mean, you have a woman, right, who's dealing with, let's say, an aggressive attacker who's outweighs her like 100 pounds. Well, 100-pound difference is significant even for guys to deal with against another guy. For a woman, it's really difficult. And so when you talk about, to me, mindset is the thing that keeps them willing to fight back. It isn't the thing that necessarily gets them to win or anything else. It's more like when the odds are stacked in a ridiculous favor against you, what are you going to do? Are you going to curl up or are you going to fight back? And fighting back when it's at its worst. So I think it's huge. I actually was in my online, I've been doing these free online classes. for students that I have. And we talked about it today because I just think like you don't have to be particularly skilled. Evidence suggests that if you want to avoid like freezing and stuff like that, the ways that you do that is to cycle through what you know and what you can do. And so for women, it's like that. For us, it's like your body can't go where your brain has never been. So if you get your brain to go there on a regular basis, then you don't have those issues so much, right? So even from just that standpoint alone, the brain is huge in martial arts. When you're talking about will to survive and things like that, that's yet another level of it. And when you get into situations where it seems perilous, statistically 96%, I think it is, of women who fight back are never sexually assaulted. That's pretty significant. Like even if they get, and the other thing is a lot of women will say like, I knew there wasn't anything I could do, so I just laid there, or I just did this, or I just did that. And that's basically your brain working through it and saying, I don't have any material to use, so I'm gonna just take it, because from a survival standpoint, you will survive doing that typically. But actually, the rate, the problem from a psychological standpoint is a woman who's generally just takes it, has feelings of remorse and regret and fear and all that stuff. But a woman who fights back has less of that.
That's fascinating. Because
they fought.
Yeah.
Right? Like it totally makes sense when you think about it, but I had never thought about it till I got into this situation. So there's no correlation between women who fight back and a woman who is injured more or less. They're actually statistically identical. So fighting back is the best alternative.
It's that old adage, it doesn't matter how you do in the fight, but it matters that you fight, right? It matters that
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Now, if you were going to have to put a label on something and say what, form of martial arts is best for women, some people are saying jiu-jitsu is great because it starts on your back. Some people are saying, no, stand-up striking with the eye gouges, Krav Maga type of thing is best. Yeah. What would your opinion be as far as how do we want to train for this type of situation?
I think my personal preference in the way that I do the Guerrilla Global stuff is you have to have a little bit of everything. Mm-hmm. I don't think you have to go, you could go super deep into any one area, but then the tendency is to look at everything like it's a nail, and right. You're the hammer. And that has limitations that forces it to be a certain way in order for you to succeed. And I think that generally speaking, if we are a little bit more instinctive in response and instinctive in our training, that will take us farther. And I'm really a huge believer, again, in the idea that your body can't go where your brain has never been. So put it in as many situations as possible within reason to expand, right? Because during that expansion, you're building intuition. You're not, intuition isn't magic, right? Intuition is built off of experience. And so if you want to have experience in something you don't ever face, well, then you have to start pointing to it, right? You have to start to see it in other things. And so I'm a huge proponent for scenario type training, but it doesn't have to be specific, right? Like I feel like generalized scenario training is a little better than specific scenario training. And the reason is because the more specific scenarios that you, just like martial arts, right? The more specific a technique is to a alignment of a certain amount of things, the more bullshit it is. It doesn't work. It's nothing, right? Like it becomes one of the 85% of the stuff you do in martial arts that doesn't ever happen in real life, right? Like And so it's kind of that way with scenarios too. You can over scenario stuff. Being taped up in a closet, to a chair with a dog outside, I mean? Like, maybe, right? Like, if you want to do that once, do it once, but like, don't make that a thing. You know what I mean? Like, because then it just becomes rote, and it doesn't do the creative process, which is really what you need with scenarios, is that thinking through, kind of adapting, taking core things that you already know and just adapting them over and over and over and over. So that's what, to me, is more critical than styles or, jujitsu or whatever.
And you bring up counter custody type of things, escaping from zip ties, duct tape, that type of thing, handcuffs even. Do you do any of that? And, do you think it's important for people to train in that type of CIA specialist type of thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think again, it's always the idea that there is hope. You have to be critically thinking, and you have to be doing something. Like, you can't just wait.
Yeah.
It's not. It's the idea. To me, it's on the same path as like, oh, I don't need to learn self-defense. I'm going to call the police. Well, average response time in the U.S. is 12 minutes. A lot of bad shit can happen in 12 minutes. So, that's not going to help you much. So to me, like, it's the same thing, right? Like, I don't need to know how to do that because that doesn't really happen very much. Well, it only needs to happen once.
Yeah.
So yeah, you should do as much of, like a variety of things. So we've done zip tie stuff. We've done duct tape stuff. I don't do it a lot, but I just do it enough to show people, like, no, there's solutions. Like, you have to work through it. And, but so much of what I end up ultimately dealing with is like, women who have been abused, children who have been abused. So like here's an example. I went to Wyoming and did a course, just a 2-day course thing. And after day one, I was showing them how to use this basically to deal with chokes, right? So like I use the same movements as much as possible to deal with situations. And to me, like, a choke is just another scenario, right? So I'm teaching you how to do that using the same way you would shield, essentially, for somebody hitting you, but using it differently. And so we do the thing, whatever. Afterwards, we're sitting there, and one of the women comes up to me. She's like, "Oh, that was, it was really cool. I like what you did, but nobody ever gets choked that way, right? Like, that doesn't happen. Blah blah." It was the kind of the standard front choke thing, whatever. Meanwhile, during the training session, I have 2 women who are literally unable to continue to participate because they're having a meltdown, basically. Which I have to start all of my courses with, the preface that, like, anybody can stop at any time for any reason. I don't need to know it. But I mean, they were literally in tears because it reminded them of a situation that happened to them. So this is how varied it is, right? You have people who are like, that's bullshit, it never happens. And then you have other people who are like, that's what my dad did.
Mm-hmm.
So, scenarios are huge. You have to go through them. You have to do them.
And I think that kind of custom tailoring almost is really essential, because I've seen it as well in classes, courses where, people who have been abused in certain ways, and it brings them right back there. And you got to be very, empathetic towards people. And it really is such a big thing. Now, when you experience this in your courses, and, maybe young ladies sitting there crying, how do you typically deal with that? Do you kind of, talk to them? Do you kind of let them alone, or?
Well, so I do it a couple different ways. It kind of is a situational way. So when I start the class, I always let people know, like, hey, we're going to do stuff, and it might trigger you. And I hate some of these, like, cliche phrases we use, but they work. They make sense in those situations. But when I'm dealing with them, I'm like, I can't be responsible for your history. You have to be. You have to own it, and you have to tell me, like, I can't do that. And my job as an instructor is to push you to try to do stuff you can't do, right? Because that's how growth occurs. So just being there You know, I have women who are like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not comfortable. And I'll just say, hey, you know, it's cool. If you need to really take a break, we can take a break. But if you think you can do part of it, let's do part of it. If you think you can just handle this, if I modify something, you tell me what you think would work. And that's kind of the process. And you get them to own it a little bit. You get them to process some. And really, at the end of the day, even if they don't do any of it physically, the fact that they're there and have somebody to talk to about it, and they'll just be like, I can't do it. That's something that happened to me, whatever, is a growth process, right? And that's all I'm trying to get them to do is grow, right? And see their own value. And so I always honor whatever they tell me. And I always ask permission, you know, can I do this? Do you mind if I do this? Because it gives them the power, right? Which is really what they need more than anything. They need to be valued enough to have been given power. And so that's really the process. And so it varies a little bit depending on the individual and how they, you know, respond.
Yeah, and I think that that's so crucial is, you know, like you were saying, giving them the power, letting them make the decision, but also helping them to grow. And it really is such an empowering thing. I've seen so many people who start off in their martial arts self-defense journey knowing nothing. And they grow a little bit, and you could start to see it, their body language, their posture, everything just becomes better. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. Now, you've got, again, kind of impressive background here, and I want to touch on a few of the arts that you have studied, starting with Kung Fu and Tai Chi. Now, was this Kung Fu separate than the Wing Chun?
Yeah. So one of my early primary arts was like it's a Mian Chuan, like a cotton fist, or an animal based, all that deal. You know, do the crane. You know.
Do you think that stuff is effective at all, or?
Oh no, absolutely not.
Right?
I mean, the reason I stopped doing it was because so it's a kind of a long story, but one of my he ended up becoming a mentor in some ways, and then I became his mentor in other ways. But I was doing that, and I enjoyed it, and it was fun, and I was learning a lot, you know, and I felt like I was a Shaolin Kung Fu master, you know, whatever. And then I met this guy who was 7 inches taller than me and almost 70 pounds heavier than me, who, you know, he'd hit you from 10 feet away. You're just like, how is that possible? You know, like, and he was just quick, 270 pounds, just be on you like crazy. Anyway, like flies on poop. But he beat the snot out of me on a regular basis, but he liked fighting me, and he was a karate guy. But he liked fighting because I did fight back, right? I wasn't afraid to fight, you know, and I could apply some of it, but I couldn't ever apply, like, you know, it wasn't gonna be like Tiger Claw, right? Like that shit didn't happen. And so he kind of, you know, through that process of clobbering each other, I basically stopped doing any of that. And then and Wing Chun was kind of along the same lines. I had moved, relocated, found some Wing Chun, was doing that with the JKD kind of stuff. And that's where I got introduced to Kali and really found the Kali to be the most interesting. And then that led me to Penchak Silat, which was that's where I've lived, because Penchak Silat to me had like the culmination of everything in one thing, and it allowed me to be. They have goofy stuff, don't get me wrong. All these, you know, Southeast Asian arts, they have stuff that you're just like, that is so not Western, you know, practical at all, right? Like, I'm not going to sit cross-legged, jump in the air, and chop you in the neck. Like, that's not going to happen ever. I'm 220 pounds, you know, like, that's just, I'm not going to hover. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to do no-handed cartwheels. Yes, that was a thing. So, you know, like, so there's crap in all of them, but there was enough solid stuff in there that I was able to start kind of like chipping away, and I would keep fighting and chipping away, and we did a lot of fighting. We rarely used gear, actually. I mean, I've had my eye socket fractured by him and been knocked out by him, unconscious, got brought all the way to the hospital before I even started to be functional again, you know, that kind of thing. So like really beating the snot out of each other. And yeah, and so you get like pretty quickly you get sorted out, you know, like, yeah, this is some bullshit. That's not going to work, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's the brilliant thing about pressure testing in martial arts is to find out what works, what doesn't very quickly.
Yeah. And we, you know, funny thing about, I like the idea of pressure testing. I'm kind of an oddball in a lot of ways, because what I've discovered in this process is that when people say pressure testing, a lot of times the context is missing. Like, okay, I'm gonna come and I'm gonna study from you, right? Cool. You're gonna teach me something, and then I'm gonna try to pressure test it. Well, you're missing like the progression in there, because you still have to actually train. You actually, you know, one is learning, and then you have to train it, and then you practice it with pressure, you know, and you grow in that. You don't just, it doesn't work.
Well, that's a brilliant concept that you bring up there. And I'm big on that with my personal training too, is the repetition and the training and the ramping it up slowly but surely.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of that in the martial arts community. And I think that's probably because there's just not time in each class. Like if I had it my way, I would go into a class and I would spend 10 classes working kind of the same, maybe couple techniques and ramping it up slowly.
Yeah.
People don't want to train that way, man. They want to learn it and move
they're lazy.
on. Yeah, exactly.
They're lazy. They want immediate results.
Yeah.
I mean, even a boxer, right? Like boxing is a well-known fact right now. There's basically 6 strikes, and footwork varies, you know, bobbing, weaving, all that stuff, right? So maybe there's 20 things you practice. And the reason they're good at it is because it's a limited quantity set of materials with a defined boundary about how you can use it. And then they progress from punching a heavy bag, punching focus mitts, to your first time light sparring, to your first time having an amateur fight, to your light sparring, you know, and you're constantly going back and forth between these, and your paradigm increases until you could theoretically become a pro fighter. But that you don't just become a pro fighter because you learn to jab cross. Like that's just ridiculous, you know, like, but that mentality seems to be missing in a lot of people's understanding. And I'm baffled by it. It makes no sense.
Well, that makes 2 of us, brother. And, you know, I've always seen Western boxing beat so many, and I say beat, but I've seen it do very well against so many of these, you know, more traditional arts, even like Wing Chun. I know Western boxing is kind of no match for JKD Wing Chun. A lot of that trapping and, you know, bong style, whatever, it's all kind of goes out the window when someone's throwing a double jab, you know, at you.
Yeah.
Why do you think that? I mean, is it just kind of the mechanics, or?
Well, I think the one thing that I would say specific to Wing Chun trapping is that, well, I would say this is an issue in, oh my God, and, you know, most of the martial arts I've studied is there's a tendency to stand still and just make your hands do the work. And that is utter BS. Like the people who are really good at fighting move their feet, they move around. Like you don't just stand there. Like Wing Chun trapping requires somebody essentially to be mobile, or immobile rather. They have to not move in order to pin their arm against their body. Because if I move, it goes away, right? Like duh. But so there's a ton of stuff like that. And a boxer's mobile. It's all about mobility, right? Like we get stuck in these paradigms of like training paradigms. Like we treat learning paradigms as though they're training paradigms, as though they're practice paradigms, right? Like, so you go like, that's why you see people going like this and waiting for the guy to finish his thing, right? And it's like, dude, that doesn't exist, right? Like the class today, we were doing destructions, right? I was teaching on destructions, and you know, even if I'm gonna back up a little bit, even if you have people who are like, you know, throwing punches at this pace, right? And they're actually trying to hit you, that's not super fast, but it's fast enough that it's pretty hard to get a decent destruction in if you don't want to get hit in the face, right? So you actually have to find the middle beat, and there's a process for doing that, but it isn't just going like this, right? Like fanning and all this other crap. And really, like at the end of the day, that stuff, the way it's delivered, only really works with knife. It doesn't really work with empty hand, because I've done destructions on people, and it, like, if they're super aggressive, they're still coming in, and they're still going to hit you. You've done nothing to disrupt them. You've hit their arm. Whatever, right? Like, so you have to do things like with a different mindset that I don't think exists really in martial arts. You have a lot of people practicing who've never been hit, and a lot of people teaching who've never been hit. Yeah. And so they're going by somebody else's theory of what worked, and having very little experience. The old days of full contact karate changed a lot of stuff. You know, a lot of people got really good then. It kind of doesn't happen. It doesn't happen as much. I mean, I think full contact karate still exists, obviously, and those guys can fight. You know, you can actually see them in the UFC. They fight and win. Yeah. And they're just karateka. You know, they don't have a lot of BJJ and all that stuff. But like Wonder Boy Thompson, this dude's mobile, and he's just a karate guy, like, who knew how to do full contact fighting. Like, you know,
well, you bring it up. And,
there's all kinds of them.
Modern mixed martial arts is, people are loving that now, because you fight, you get hit, you wrestle around, and you don't find that in other schools. You know, for example, Krav Maga, you just don't get the full contact type of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that it's essential, like we've been talking about. You really got to go full bore against each other and fight to learn how to fight. What do you think the solution here is? I mean, other than, you know, because schools don't want to go ahead and open up and say, okay, well, you can come in and train, but you're probably going to get hit and you might get a broken nose or something. No one's going to pay you for that. Right.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I mean, the way that, so I'm dealing a lot with women, right? So obviously I'm not going to go in there and beat them up. Mm-hmm. Right. Oh. So even the guys, the way, there's kind of a saying I have some guys who've been with me like 15, 16, 17 years, whatever. And for those guys, you know, we kind of have a saying, like, you start training with me and I'm fairly gentle, but over time you boil the frog, right? Like, mm-hmm. You just a little bit harder this time, a little bit harder this time, a little bit faster this time, a little bit faster. And you just kind of build up, and then you can do some pretty real training without a ton of injury. You get some, I mean, you're going to get fat lips and cuts and whatever, but, you know, like nothing crazy. Nobody wants to be broken and trying to go to work, you know, like, you know, Hugo, the guy that I used to fight, who was a big dude, you know, one of the times we were sparring, I screwed up his knee. I blew his knee out. Mm. Well, he worked at the time as in siding for homes. Well, that was a problem because he couldn't get on the ladder, you know, and then I started like going, okay, maybe there's got to be a different way here. Because some of the stuff we do, like, unlike boxing, which has sport rules and there's a paradigm of safety there, you can still get killed, but it's really unlikely. But you can put headgear on, and, you know, you got gloves which protect the hands, but also a little bit to the face. And so you can bring some of that in. I'm all about gear. Put gear on. Let somebody feed, you know, and be hit. So I'm more about output, right? Like, I'd rather teach women what it's like to use power and hit somebody, and not have to be too worried about the touchy touch stuff. Mm. And so I use focus mitts and go at them, you know, and get them moving, and like, no, you got to apply in here, right? Like, so it's really about building that chaotic pressure, and they're getting all the audible noise of the mitts hitting them, and, you know, they're still dealing with a lot of things, but it doesn't quite break them down physically, right? So there's a little bit of a boiling of the frog, you know, like when I have a coach, a female coach in Georgia, and when I go and do seminars at her location, whatever, you know, people watch how I attack her and they get like intimidated, right? Because I'll just go at her like, okay, we're going to do this. You know, we'll give her a warm up round or so, and then it'll just be like, I'm going to go, right? Wah, 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 wah. And she's got to figure out how to do her stuff. And so what I like to do is, as a coach, is I like to coach up to the point of failure, right? And then we bring it down a little bit and coach back up to the point of failure, bring it down a little bit and coach back up, right? And that's how you get skill, right? You don't get skill by just, you know, bashing somebody.
Right.
That doesn't teach them. That just makes them afraid. So you have to bring them up to it by getting them to that point of failure and being a good enough coach to back off just enough so they can succeed with work, and then bring it back up again. And that's the way you should do it, in my opinion. I think it's, you know, that's that progressive pressure thing, you know.
Yeah. Wow. Very, very scientific. So
I'm a nerd.
Well, you know, that makes two of us, to be honest. I think most of us martial artists out here, honestly, are kind of nerdy, and we wouldn't be good at what we do if we weren't. So
yeah. I mean, if you weight lift, right? So like another example along the same lines, because I feel like most things are very similar. We just refuse to look at them that way. Yeah. We like our own little box of distinction. But like, if I'm going to weight lift, how I determine what my max is I do a max lifting day, right? And I go up to my 1 rep max or my 2 rep max, whatever that is. And I go, oh, okay, that's where I'm going to be at. So then I go down 20%, 60%, whatever. And that's where I lift at until I can increase that. You don't just constantly lift at your max, because you'll end up, you know, with crushed ribs from the bar falling on you, you know, like, duh, right? So this is the same process, right? You go up, you test where it is, and then you come back down and you continually build it. So
it's funny you say that, because literally while you were talking about going to failure, I was thinking about weightlifting in my head.
Yeah.
So yeah, very similar process. Now, I want to bring up the knife fighting aspect of all of this. Now, do you guys train with live blades at all?
I have. I've gotten stitches out of that a few times. I don't do it really anymore. What I prefer mostly doing is teaching people how to defend without a knife.
Okay.
So
yeah,
you know, it's not truly, like, I would say it's not truly possible, but the amount of skill you develop at being mobile, having good hands, you know, not forgetting you can punch somebody, all that stuff goes way up. When you stop thinking like it's a tit for tat kind of thing, oh, I'm gonna cut you, cut me, when it's just you on the hunt or them on the hunt, you know, okay, I gotta move, I gotta get some wheels, and you learn how to like control space. You know, spatial control is huge, angle huge, learning how to interrupt, movement and attacks huge. You know, when you can start to do those things really efficiently, then your knife game gets better, even if you don't use a knife, right? Because your hands, if you can hit, you can stab, but like, you know. And I'm so another one of these weird oddball things that I do is I am predominantly a stab person. I don't much slash anymore. And the reason is because it's so, even if I'm defending, right? Like if I can do a destruction like this, right? I can do it like this. Wow. And that's, if we think about it, right? Like slashing is surface, right? Causes a lot of bleeding, doesn't usually cause a lot of structural loss or any of that stuff, unless you get tendons, which is very unique, right? So stabbing is the most dangerous thing, so why don't we just do it? Right? Like, why jack around with all the rest? Can you imagine going to court and I cut the guy 75 times. Well, no court of law, like your jury of peers, they're going, what the fuck? You know, like the guy had a gun, so I cut him 75 times before he died. You know, like they're still thinking you're the bad guy. Yeah. Right? You can shoot somebody and kill him. You could shoot him twice, kill him, and have less issue than if you slash or stab somebody 12 times, right? Like, it's just a fact. Like, because people see the movies. In movies, you get stabbed once, you fall down dead. Right. No accounting for reality there. And so that's what people visualize. So like knife to me is like one of those precariously go to jail types of tools.
Mm-hmm.
You got to use it, but be judicious, figure out how to make it as quick and efficient as possible. And to me, that's stabbing. Slashing is not that.
That's a great point. Yeah, I can see that stabbing would definitely cause a lot more damage ultimately than slashing, assuming you didn't get an artery or something like that.
No.
When it comes to knives, I've always heard the old adage: give a boxer a knife, and he will be able to, do way more than a trained knife fighter. What do you think about that statement?
I haven't really thought about it much, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, like, in theory, that's how boxing came to be, as I understand it. Moving from this paradigm in the early 1900s, World War I, as I understand it, is when we switched to this, which was from the Filipinos. The Filipinos were boxing like this because of Kali, because of the stick and the knife. And so that's when we switched from this to this, from the English style to, Western. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I've been told.
I've heard
that. It kind of makes sense. But so I think it's possible. Yeah. I mean, they have the mobility, they have the body work,
It really lends to what you were saying as far as, if you can hit and you can move, you can certainly stab as well. Now,
yeah, I look, here's the thing, right? Like, if somebody's stabbing you or slashing you, and you can put your hand on their whatever attack to parry it or block it or stop it, well, why couldn't you just stab it? You know what I mean? Like, how is that different? If it's different, I don't understand how it's different. You know what I mean? Like, the lines are better, right?
Right.
You can miss. I'm not saying that there's not some high risk things when you do that, but the reward is also higher, right? So there's that high risk, high reward thing, and if you train to be good at it,
Sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely. And training to be good at it is really kind of, again, what we're going back to is a lot of people want to watch the knife fighting DVD, and then now I'm Rambo, right? And then I put the work in.
Yeah. And there's a lot of mythology in all of it too. Like, dude, I can't even tell you how many times I've heard people say, like, oh, never kick a knife out of a guy's hand. They'll cut your Achilles tendon and stuff. And it's like, dude, if you knew how many times I've kicked a knife out of somebody's hand, like, yes, they could cut your Achilles tendon if your kick is slower than crap and they see it coming and they process what you're doing. Yes, they could do that. But most of the time, you just pop the thing up there and it goes boop.
Yeah. It's incredible, man, how, and this is, again, you talk about being a little bit of a nerd, but there's so many, nerds in the martial arts community who all day back and forth on the chat rooms or whatever, the forums, well, this and da-da-da and this and da-da-da. But really, when it comes down to it, how many times have they been in a fight? How many times have they, sparred all the way? And there's just so much of that goes on that it's incredible when you look at the things that shouldn't work, how they work, and the things that should work and how they don't work.
Yeah.
It's such a fascinating science, dude.
When you get into like how to defend against a knife, and the bulk of people who survive knife attacks just grab onto the arm. And they don't do anything fancy. They just hold on for dear life.
And that's something that I wanted to bring up too is, stopping a knife against, you've got your empty hands, they've got a knife. I mean, number one, the adrenaline's going to be kicking so much and everything, but can you give us just, talking here, kind of maybe a tip or two? How can we start to go ahead and put that into our mindset to prevail in a situation like that? Well,
yeah, I think it's, honestly, to me, again, I feel like it's scenario based, right? If I want to be good at dealing with it, then I have to start by dealing with it, right? Progressively, of course. And, developing the mindset, the skills, all come from that exposure, right? I've had moments where like I've been pushed down the stairs by somebody, and while I was being pushed, didn't know it was going to happen. None of that, that kind of thing. Throwing a kick that's hit them right where their head is, right? While I'm heading downstairs, right? Like, never had that as a scenario, but I have the mechanics already, right? So you got to have the mechanics. So you got to build that, whatever that looks like. For me, I have a whole process of footwork. It doesn't necessarily follow triangles and all these other patterns and all that stuff, right? But it's a pattern of movement, which gets you functionally moving in any direction at any point within a reasonable depth of space, right? So learning how to do that's a fundamental piece for everything I do. Doing it all the same for everything. So for example, a lot of guys who knife fight change leads. They go from, I'm a boxer, right? And then they get a knife and they go like this.
Yeah.
Why? It makes no sense. Why change all of that up?
Yeah, I learned that in Jeet Kune Do of all places, and I don't know if this was something from Bruce or not, but a lot of the Marines and the military guys, you'll see them kind of doing this, and my JKD coach was like, well, why not put the knife out here where you can slash a little bit better, get a little better lead? Yeah. But I thought that was fascinating too, and it is fascinating to see how different some of these arts are, but also how similar they are when it really comes down to it.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in having strong side training. I'm not a believer necessarily in equal training. Nerding out again. If I take, let's say I take 6 boxing strikes, okay, and all I do is switch leads. Right now, essentially, I've got 12 different strikes that I'm trying to get good at. And let's say I have a year, and I train an hour a week, twice a week for an hour, right? So I'm going to train for 104 hours if I train every week 2 hours. And then I divide that by 12, right? Whatever that is, I don't know. It's not going to be a lot. That's how much time I'm dedicating to just my strikes. Well, but then I have footwork, and I have body evasions, and I'm sucking at my left hand, so I gotta give that a little more time, right? And so you start dividing your time up by all these skills, and you add weapons into that, and slivers, dude. We're getting like slivers of training time, and we think we're ninjas and whatever, it's ridiculous. So the least amount of stuff you can vary to deal with anything, the better. If you can sit in a chair and I use this footwork I call explosive footwork. Whatever. Anyway, I have a course on my website and stuff if people are really interested. But it's really about learning how to use our startle reflex as propulsion, right? Like how to propel ourselves in any direction from a standstill. You can be running and jump and go in a different direction. And that's a type of footwork that I use for everything. If I'm doing weapons, it's going to be the same. If I'm doing empty hands, it's going to be the same. If I'm teaching people how to get up off the ground, it's going to be the same. If you're getting them out of a chair, it's going to be the same. And it's just that to me is the way to give depth to any kind of training. And that's how you should approach, to me, knife or any other skill, right? Make it a similar.
That's absolutely brilliant, to be honest with you, man. And this lends something that I've always been fascinated with is how do you take a guy or a girl and bring them from a very low level or no level of training to a person that's effective enough that they can survive through a hostile environment or a bad encounter. How quickly can that be done? Realistically speaking, like you look at the Marine Corps and all of that, and they take someone with no training and then they make them able to fight. In your opinion, what's the quickest that we could possibly do this effectively?
Well, the one thing that we don't have as an advantage in the military, what's actually happening is you're not training them to be effective fighters as individuals. You're training them to be effective followers and listening to somebody who's a better fighter, right? Like, I mean, the goal is you have a team leader. Team leader has a sergeant, squad leader, whatever. That's the process, right? So you're teaching people how to shoot. You're teaching them fundamentals, teaching them how to understand concealment versus cover and all the foundations. And then you're saying shut up and follow this dude.
Right.
Right. So it isn't quite exactly apples to apples. The guys who can SEAL Team 6 or whatever, their training goes how long? Right.
Right. Exactly. But I mean, very valid points. However, I'm kind of more specifically talking about the hand-to-hand application here.
Yeah. And I guess my point is it kind of depends on what the intent is. Is my intent to just get home at night? Then here's what I would teach you more than anything, more than physical skills. I would teach you how to recognize and develop your non-physical skills. Threat management, threat recognition, conflict management, conflict communication, stuff like that. Because most of the time, if we're really honest, most of the time we put ourselves in stupid situations and don't recognize it. And we open our mouth and add to it. Yeah. Right. But now if we're talking about hand-to-hand physical content, physical fighting, I think that it's quite varied because I've had people who, I've had people come in my class who could do parkour, who you're just like, how is it possible you don't know what left is from right? What is actually happening here? Who just the klutziest people ever. Seriously. And then I've had women who've come in who I did ballet and they have this amazing body awareness, right? So they're able to just pick stuff up. For them, it's more of an issue of mentality because they have a body awareness and an understanding of physical motion. So the scale is huge. I think anybody can be improved if you limit their vision a little bit, right? And what I mean, if I give you, here's the foundation, right? Work this. Anybody who comes in and works hard will improve. Fact, right? My first martial arts teacher, my kung fu teacher, he had senior students, right? I came in 2 years and got certified to teach. Passed up some of his senior students. They were pissed. And he's like, I mean, the reality is he's doing the work. I would go, what I did is I learned how to learn. So I would go to my class, do whatever we did. By the time I got home, I would have written it all down, and then I would practice it again. And then I would practice it again that night. And so I did that process every time I did class, and then I practiced 3-4 times a week, whatever. They weren't doing that, so they weren't advancing, right? So if you can teach a person how to learn, that's a huge thing. And getting them to care about it is it's fascinating. Because you have people who just don't want to do the work.
Yeah. Absolutely you do. And, that's another thing is learning how to learn. And I think that's something that is so overlooked is when you're a student of any subject, but, let's bring it to the martial arts because that's what we're talking about. When you learn how to learn the martial arts, you're going to be able to pick up not only boxing, not only salat, but whatever it is, and you're going to be able to do it a lot faster. And
and there's such a variety, a scale of I have people who are it's kind of a hobby for me, so how long is it going to take that person? Forever.
Yeah.
Right? And you have a guy like you who's totally into it, wants to do it. It's going to take, a year maybe.
Yeah.
with a limited set of tools, it's for certain not going to take as long. I mean, I can say that 100%. Like if the tool set is like, so I believe like for self-protection, I teach hammer fist, I teach elbows. And the reason I teach hammer fist is because it works so well with improvised weapons. And the elbows, you already got them. You're already using them to defend yourself, survival skills, covering up, right? If you can just learn how to change your mindset, you have a tool, right? Like that you can use that's impactful, pun intended, that causes damage, not really difficult to use. You can get somebody to do that in 6 months and be aggressive, right? Like I don't think it takes long to do that. That's why I do it, because if we're real about, self-defense, if you haven't done self-defense classes, it is a different paradigm, because you have, like, for example, women who come one time, and they go, well, I took a self-defense class 13 years ago. What do you're not going to teach them much. So you have to teach them how to survive, right? And if they stay with you, then you teach them how to survive with a little bit of gusto, right? Like instead of just doing this, you go like, put that thing out there so they hit it, right? I call this passive and this active. Being active is the next step, right? And then from active, you can go like almost like passive aggressive, right? Like I'm just protecting myself and he ran into my elbows, like, I don't know. That's kind of the scale. So like, martial arts, I think a boxer, somebody who goes into a boxing class who specifically wants to learn how to box, they're obviously going to progress faster than somebody who comes once a week and wants to do it for health.
Yeah.
So I know that's a non-answer, but it's just what it is. Like
for me, for my end, man, I really got a lot out of that non-answer. So it was probably better than an answer straight up. So how do we develop aggression? I mean, this is just something that's so important. How do we take, for example, that woman that wants to take self-defense, but she also clearly needs to have a little bit of aggressiveness. How do we develop that?
Yeah, so I have a way that I've done it in the past. Some of my guys still talk about those events. I think that it is a delicate thing to do, delicate in the way that you have to know the person, and the person has to acknowledge that they're a willing participant. I used to train people in what I would call a spirit test, and it would be essentially like Hell Week or something, but just a one-off event. Pick somebody and say like, okay, there are people are willing to fight. Like, when you're training with them, they will fight. You just know. Like, I have people that I've worked with who I just could tell, like, at any time this person will turn it on, they know what they're talking about, right? And then you have people there who've never, they just know it's not there, right? You can just tell. And so those people, myself, a few other people that I've worked with in the past, use this thing called a spirit test, where you basically identify that person who you think could switch on. There are people will never switch on, and there are people you think could switch on but haven't. And you essentially, for lack of a better way to phrase it, you kind of beat them up. You pick at them, and you pick at them, and you pick at them, and you pick at them. And here's generally what happens. Most of these would last about an hour, hour and a half. And what I would do is like, okay, like we're going to do this thing. We're going to fight, spar, whatever. You're not allowed to stop. And they'd be like, well, yeah, whatever. I can do that. That's fine, right? And you just start. And it doesn't have to be anything. You're not like, you just pick at them. Every time they take a step forward, you blast their shin. Every time they put an arm out, you blast their arm. And when they get tired, because they all will, 15 minutes into this, they're just gonna be like, I'm good, I'm done. And you're like, no, we're not done. Like, I'm sorry you thought that's how this went, but what I said was there was no quitting. Like, so then you just keep picking. I've had people like put their arms down and refuse to fight. Okay, but we're still going. Like, and just blast them in the shin and blast them in the shin and blast them in the shin. I have had one person literally walk out the door. That's their prerogative. They don't come back. That's okay, right? Like, it's fine. But if you're going to stay here, this is what we're doing. And just pick and pick and pick and pick. And then they go through that stage to, okay, they're going to fight back, right? And they'll get a little aggressive for a while, and then they'll, oh, I'm tired, I really need to quit, right? And then they'll get angry. And usually when they get angry, I'll slap them across the face and stuff like that. I might be bruising their shins, but I'm not beating the shit out of them, right? I'm just picking at them. Picking, but it's painful, and it goes on and on and on until they have this moment. It always comes after they get angry. They get angry, and then they drop out, and then they come back at this like, all right, whatever, dude. Let's go. When that happens, I quit. Because they will have this complete mentality shift. It'll not be like a game anymore. When they're able to just go like, all right, whatever you do, I'm gonna freaking hit you. That's the shift, right? That shift is huge. When people get there, they got there. There's no question. And it's no longer safe because they will just go. It's not like blitzkrieg violence, right? It's more like you want to cut me? I'm gonna bite your ear off. It's that kind of mentality, and it's a switch, and you can see it. It's very obvious when it happens, and you just go, all right, we're good.
Now, is that shift permanent? I mean,
it seems to be.
Yeah.
I mean, they seem to get back there a lot quicker. I think it's more. I don't think it's really an issue. I think it's more like giving yourself permission, right?
Right.
It isn't that the mentality is not there. It's there. That's how we've survived for millions of years, right? It's just giving yourself societal permission to like, I'm going to fight back and mean it at any cost.
That's something that's so key there is the societal permission, because it's not like we fight most days, most ever in life these days. Here in the Western countries, it's so civilized, but at the same time, I think what you're saying is so crucial.
Yeah, women, I run into it a lot with women. Like, they're taught to be nice all the time, right? Oh, could you not touch me? I'm like, no, I mean, you need to, like, if you can set a boundary verbally, then you can set it physically, right? And you shouldn't apologize for having one, right? You have to just kind of own it, because if you're apologizing for having one, it tells me that you're not serious about having one.
Right.
Right. So the point at which you can go, you don't have to be apologetic. You can just be like, I prefer you don't do that. It doesn't have to be you're a dick, right? Now, a predator is going to always respond negatively because they have something to gain for being a predator. You know what I mean? Right. So they might go, oh, you're a bitch, whatever, blah, 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 right? Well, that's predatory. And if you spill a drink on a dude or whatever, and you're like, oh, can I get you another drink? You offer a solution. It's non-apologetic. It doesn't admit fault, right? But you offer a solution, and they're like, fuck you, you're an asshole, blah, blah, blah. Well, you're right. I'm an asshole. Do you want the drink or do you not want the drink? Right? Like, it's still, I've given you the solution. If you choose not to take it, then I know you're being predatory.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward.
No, exactly. And when somebody's being predatory like that, when that's their personality, that's their personality. I don't think you're going to be able to change it, but you certainly are able to defend yourself, which is exactly what you're teaching. Yeah. Well, listen, Sean, I could keep going with you for another 3 hours. I'm like certain of it, but I'm going to be here for the sake of the podcast. But I want to ask you if you wouldn't mind at some point down the road coming back on. We'd love to have you back, dude.
Yeah, it'd be great. Yeah, I'd love to.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I just want to reiterate to guys, the Guerrilla Guru, Sean Stark, here on Instagram. And now, Sean, do you have a YouTube channel at all?
I do, yeah. It's kind of a goofy one because I only have like 80 followers so far, so I have that goofy like number name thing.
Yeah.
But I'm probably going to get a link tree set up on my Instagram profile so that I can have it all on there.
Cool.
And then I have a couple of books on Amazon, actually like 8, I think. And then the guerrillaglobal.org website.
I would highly encourage you guys out there to go check out Sean's material. I have learned so much from this discussion. I'm going to be going back over my notes here and processing it. And so I really appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks. Yeah, anytime you want to have it again, I'll do it.
Awesome. Sounds good, man.
Yeah.
Listen, guys, until next time, please remember that you are your first and last line of defense. Don't joke around about that. Right now, it's some serious times. Start training, start learning if you haven't already, and if you have, keep doing it. Well, I will see you in the next podcast, guys. Cheers, motherfucker.